Next on the PowerPLAY show, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, a month to raise awareness of those living with mental or behavioral health issues and to help reduce the stigma so many experience. We talked to the counseling couple Kadeem and Sade Messiah on mental health, beginning with the basics. Next on the PowerPLAY show.
From the studios at Hull Bay Productions, this is Season 4 of the PowerPLAY Show.
Welcome to the PowerPLAY show. I'm Tonya McGrath.
And I'm Kimberly Perez. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, a month to raise awareness of those living with mental or behavioral health issues and to help reduce the stigma so many experience. Although many working in the field of mental health may argue that 31 days is nearly not enough time to dedicate to the nation's most prominent illnesses. In fact, mental health is in the top 10 most common health conditions nationwide, behind cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. According to data from a 2023 survey on the state of mental health in America, 21% of adults are experiencing at least one mental illness. This is a number that's grown during the past few years, largely due to the pandemic.
So what are the signs? When should we ask for help? And how do we get past all these stigmas? Joining us today is an extraordinary couple in love and in practice. Pastor Kadeem Messiah has been working in the mental health field for a decade, specializing in addressing symptoms of anxiety, depression, self-esteem, and relational stressors, just to name a few. Sade Messiah has over 6 years as a licensed therapist, focusing on utilizing creative techniques to empower individuals through various life challenges. Sade works with clients managing depression, anxiety, and trauma for men, women, students, and families. Together, the Messiahs are trauma-informed and certified in a family-centered treatment model. We'll learn more about that in a bit. Now, Kadeem and Sade, welcome to the PowerPLAY show.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We're beginning an important discussion on many facets of mental health, and today I want to begin with the basics. First, beginning with you, Sade, what does mental health mean for you personally?
So for me, mental health is all about being intentional on focusing on my emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Trying to be very committed of how aware I am of how I feel, think, and behave, and how that affects other people that I engage with. That's what it would be for me.
And Kadeem, same question.
Great question. Mental health for me is a little bit different than my wife, who's so much smarter than me. It means a personal check on my development as a human being, and how does my mind impact my emotions and impact my behavior. And what ways do I really make sure that I'm functioning in a healthy way, not just in body, but also in my mind and in my soul.
Kadeem, I mentioned in the introduction that the percentage of adults experiencing a mental illness has grown to 21%, which equates to 1 in 5 adults. This number has grown since the pandemic. What do you see going on here?
It's a great question. So I would venture to say that the pandemic only illuminated what was already happening in a lot of people around the country. Mental health was an issue that I think went far ignored, and being home, isolated, and not able to get outside of the house really impacted people's ability to function, but it also made people become way more aware of their mental health. And so these issues were issues that were already really lying dormant. And I believe the pandemic really brought things to the surface that were already present.
And Sade, when it comes to adolescents, the numbers are even more alarming, with 22% or more than 1 in 5 seriously considering suicide, and 10% attempted suicide. Is this also pandemic related, or is there more to unpack here?
Yes, so the pandemic also had a huge impact on our young people as well, due to isolation, not being at school with their peers and teachers as much. And so I would also say increased screen usage has also been an impact, or had an impact on our young people's mental health. I would say social media is another factor. There's research that states increased social media usage at younger ages, also like that's resulting in depression symptoms and anxiety for those that use it quite a bit in comparison to their peers that do not use it as frequently. And so I would say that these two things, screen time, video games included, especially for our young men, our young boys, and social media usage are also to be considered as to why we see these like egregious increases in mental illness and suicidal ideation.
And I want to follow up with that just a little bit before I move on to my next question, because, you know, I can't get on Instagram or Facebook without learning about someone who has sadly, I think the clinical term is completed suicide. And these are like famous people. These are people who, you know, we've watched on television. We've watched them play a sport or what have you. So Kadeem, you know, how, if you could, in just a few words, and I know it's a big question, but how can you really look at the pandemic and what was directly connecting with people who have taken their lives? Like, what is that connection?
So studies show that a spouse or someone who's diagnosed with terminal illness tends to live longer than when they are married or they have a significant other or a partner. Statistics have shown even a pet, even in some sort of companionship helps people to persevere. I believe that the pandemic only further exacerbated people's internal loneliness. And so I think that what we're seeing now, there's a great need for community more than ever. And I think that there is a direct correlation between suicidal ideation, the increase of suicidal attempts within our generation, within the younger generation, even the older generation. Statistics are showing that African Americans, there was a time where you could say that they were statistically much lower than our white counterparts in suicidal attempts. But after the pandemic, many of those statistics have changed. So I really believe culturally, if you even look at it culturally, we vibe in community. And so without that community, I think that the pandemic really played a role in stripping people and leaving people in their loneliness and leaving people to their own devices, unfortunately. And, substance abuse disorders, I mean, the list goes on with how the pandemic really impacted. But I think that there is a direct correlation to people being removed out of community and what we're seeing in this specific disorder when it comes to suicide attempts.
And you just mentioned substitute, which is my next question to you, Kadeem. The other thing we're finding is as mental health illnesses have been diagnosed, so has substance abuse. As someone, me, who has been sober for almost 6 years, I can absolutely attest to how alcohol helped my anxiety, or at least I thought it did. What are you seeing in this area?
We all have healthy and unhealthy coping skills. We all have ways that we get over what we're feeling. And so substance use is a way that we medicate what we're feeling. And though that's cliche, it's really true. There is extremely high numbers of substance use and abuse in Generation Z. The statistics are high, and I believe that social media plays a role in that. I believe there's so many things that play a role in that, but we're seeing unprecedented amounts of young people in specific dealing with substance abuse issues in the mental health field that have not been seen before, or maybe not as prevalent. Maybe they were seen, but not as prevalent. And I think a lot of that has to do with the social pressures, the anxieties, the opportunities and the options of the world that we live in today. Am I going to Harvard? Am I going to Yale? Am I going to become an influencer? Am I going to be on YouTube? What do I, there's so many different options. It has changed, and it is increasing anxiety at alarming rates. And I believe that people are turning to what makes them feel good and what can make them feel good quick. Our role as clinicians in this field, unfortunately, I can't sit here and say that coming to a session with myself or my wife is going to make you feel better quickly. This is a process. It's a journey. And so sometimes we don't want that journey. And sometimes we want to feel better faster. And so we can't, we don't demonize people for wanting to feel better faster. And so I believe we're just seeing these substance abuse numbers rise because people want to feel better quicker.
And Sade, the other thing that Kim and I were discussing before we started the show is the stigmas, these awful stigmas associated with mental illness, particularly in communities of color, particularly in the African-American community. Where do these stigmas come from?
So I think these stigmas are deeply rooted in slavery, our history of being an enslaved people. And why do I say that? Well, as enslaved people, you were not allowed to, or did not have the space to process how you felt, because you were only able to think about what it meant to survive, not thrive, not do well, to survive. And so I believe that this created very strong narratives around, I have to be strong, I have to look strong, I must be perceived as strong, because if anyone sees a weakness in me, that could mean that I could be harmed, that could mean that I could be disposed of. And so I believe that is where these stigmas have been deeply rooted. And as to why, even in 2023, I still have African-American clients that can come to me and say, my family still doesn't talk about certain things. It created privacy, not even privacy, really secrecy. We had to hide certain things just because you wanted to stay safe. I would also say that religion plays a role in some of these stigmas, and not just Christianity. So in most religions, you have, evil and good. And if by chance there are any abnormalities, right, that you show, then usually it is because of some sort of possession or oppression, right? So I think this idea that a God or a higher power is there to help absolve us of or resolve us of things takes away the hard work actually that mental health requires. And so I think that's also a part of the stigma, is some religious history and background.
Okay, so speaking of the church, and I'm in no way coming after the church, but attitudes in the past towards those living with a mental illness has been to pray the illness away. So how do you both guide a person who comes to you in church with potential mental health challenges?
I think my biggest focus with clients of mine that have a faith-based background is, in a sense, separating the two. Because I believe that, we were given emotions and have emotions for a reason, right? That we have certain things that show up in us or manifest in us emotionally, behaviorally, cognitively, for a reason. They're not there to be ignored, and they're not there to just disappear, kind of to what Kadeem was saying, right? There's not this quick fix, and it just doesn't work like that. And so I attempt to separate. I try to really focus on what are the things that are presenting themselves and not spiritualizing them as much as picking from or looking through your life experiences that have contributed to why you're feeling the way that you are feeling. What maybe happened in your family upbringing, your childhood? Are there traumatic experiences that are not resolved and haven't been acknowledged, right? We got to deal with what we're seeing still, despite the fact that you have a possibly strong faith base. And then with some of my clients, incorporating faith work-based practices and disciplines, those are things that I don't have a problem incorporating. I just don't want, and I always tell my clients this, I just don't want that to be the blanket by which you cover up the things that you're dealing with and need to deal with.
So to piggyback off of what my wife so eloquently said, I think for me, as a pastor and someone who has pastored a church in the past, pastored for a few years in Charlotte, North Carolina, one of the things that was really, really important to me, though I'm clinically trained, was understanding people's stories. I think that at times, what can happen is when we have this God who is able to absolve us of this feeling, we become fixated with the feeling that the God gives. And we're so quick to want to move past the work that it takes to deal with the internal issues. But Jesus was into the issues. And Jesus met the woman at the well. He said, hey, I know that you got some issues, and the man that you with right now ain't your husband. How about that? Jesus knew her story. He was open to knowing her story, and he wasn't condemning her. When the woman that was caught in adultery, he said, you without sin, cast the first stone. Jesus showed over and over and over again that there was something to be said about knowing people's stories. And I believe that the church is a place, and should be a place, where our stories come together, our histories come together, and with that God, that powerful God, we can examine those stories and still receive that healing from that God, still receive that healing from that Savior, still receive that healing, however, still work through the issues. And that's what mental health clinicians, that's what we're there for. We are not we're not the antidote. Jesus really is, right? For me, Jesus is the antidote. He is the healer. I walk away from that healing, and now I'm being pressured to do the work. And so I think that's the way that we should approach it. And I think that's the way that some churches are taking the turn to that arena. Unfortunately, it's not all. It's not all, but some churches are taking that turn.
You know, Kadeem, there are also issues associated with people getting the help that they need. And, you know, that is medical and psychiatric access. We all heard about the horrific story of Jordan Neely, a homeless man who was put in a chokehold by a passenger and subsequently died as a result. Neely was known to homeless advocates as someone in need of mental health care, but many without insurance have a hard time accessing help. In fact, 28% of people who feel they need help can't get help. What more can be done in this area?
Yeah, don't get me started about this. Well, first of all, we've got a major issue in our country when it comes to access and affordability. And that goes from insurance to housing affordability. I mean, we just moved back to the Boston area from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm almost appalled at what it costs to live here. And to exist, your baseline needs. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the baseline needs are just food, shelter, clothing. Like, those are the baseline needs, and most people aren't getting that. Then now we're making insurance a luxury, right? And so depending on how much money you're making determines how much access you have. And it is fair to say, I'm going to get on my soapbox, that this is a systemic tactic to keep people of color where they are when it comes to their mental, physical, and emotional health. It is statistically proven that people of color are still the majority in the poverty line in this country. And the majority of people without access. And if there's anything that the pandemic showed us, an alarming rate by the amount of people of color that died from COVID-19. I think that there is an issue, a racial, structural issue at play in our country. And it's something that has to be addressed, and something that has to be dealt with, and something that has been going on for a long time. This is not new. But as time has gone on and access has become more warranted and it just makes more sense and people have access to education, it would only make sense that people would also have access to healthcare and to get the things done and needs met that they need, as well as our veterans. The list goes on, right? It just, sometimes it's appalling to think the way that people are being treated in a country that they fought for, in a country that they work in, that they live in, that they believe in. So yeah, we've got an issue at hand, but it is systemic, and it's going to take policy being put in place to make change. And so for myself and even for Sade, that's like the goal, right? Because it's great doing talk therapy, it's great helping people one-on-one, but we also need more people of color in policy, more people of color getting their PhDs and writing and doing research. We need more people of color sitting in seats and at tables that can affect change.
We need to take a quick break. More on the PowerPLAY show right after this. Hi, I'm Tonya McGrath, producer and director of the upcoming film documentary, More Than Our Skin. When I started developing this film, it was about the lives of 5 women living with the autoimmune disease vitiligo. The disease was a construct in which I would come to understand what living with their condition was like for each of them. But after I met these extraordinary women, something happened. They invited me into their homes and their worlds, shared their peaks and valleys, then revealed to me how they found their true purpose. Getting to know these women, it soon became apparent, was more than their personal stories and hardships. It was discovering their journeys of what truly matters most. Their beauty isn't defined by skin creams or makeup or how the world defines them.
I have come a long way. I've learned to accept what I have.
I don't know everybody's story, but some things that you've been through that was so rough and that you didn't think you were gonna make it.
I didn't know where the vitiligo was going and how far it was gonna go.
It's all for a purpose. The purpose that I feel is to help somebody else.
That's why I have my spots. That's why he did it. Because nothing's an accident.
I invite you to visit More Than Our Skin and learn about the stories of these 5 amazing women, the production crew behind the making of this film, and to consider making a donation to help this film to its completion. Our goal is simple. We want the audience, you, to see what's behind the skin and know that you can make a difference now by seeing, hearing, and loving the person behind their spots. I know I have, and I hope you will too.
We're talking to Kadeem and Sade Messiah on mental health, beginning with the basics on the PowerPLAY show. Sade, we have a few minutes left, and I want to get to the basics of what we all need to know and know what to look for. What are some of the basic signs we all need to be concerned about when it comes to mental health, whether in ourselves or for a loved one?
I would say that the first thing you want to really pay attention within yourself or your loved one is their patterns of behavior changing. That's the first step. Looking sad for a day or two, versus someone struggling to get out of bed for 2 weeks is you got to look for very stark differences and changes within their behavior, and that is going to be a tell-all sign that something's off. I would say, loss of pleasure in things that they once enjoy doing, right? Maybe it's a favorite food or an activity, like they like to roller skate, something that they enjoy doing that you realize they're not doing any longer. That's also a huge sign. Isolation is big. I think those that are struggling really tend to withdraw quite a bit. and paying attention to, especially for our young people, self-harm is a really big thing that young people know how to hide very, very well. And so checking for things in their room, like sharp things, edges and things of that nature also, just to ensure that they haven't taken it to the next level or step as a means to cope. So those would be the main things that I would pay attention to within myself or loved ones, for sure.
And Kadeem, you touched on this a little bit in the last segment about access to mental health services, but we also have heard a lot about defunding the police. And of course, this all came about during the Black Lives Matter movement, I should say. Mostly the argument being that police are not qualified to deal with individuals suffering a mental episode. So my basic question is, who should be called?
Great question. So there are a few ways now that I think we should be looking at this. I 100% agree that police are not qualified to deal with mental health crisis. And because of that, I believe that this is a part of policy change, policy procedures and structures. I believe that there should be mental health clinicians on call and ready to handle and deal with certain situations at certain levels. Also, I believe that the police departments should be being trained on de-escalation tactics by mental health professionals. In particular, in our country, our police have not always been great in that arena. However, if we look throughout Europe and other countries, there have been plenty examples that we've seen where police academies, police officers were able to just de-escalate situations without use of force. However, that's not how our police are being trained here in this country. And so I think that there's a need for mental health training. I think there's a need for psych evals with our police departments and with our police officers, because a lot of what we're experiencing are people who've been triggered and that are responding to a trigger based off of their own trauma and their desire to come home at night. So there's a lot at play here. If I get into this defunding police conversation, I'm probably gonna get in trouble. But I do agree that the mental health clinicians are needed on the front line.
That's such a great point that you made. And I just kind of want to put just an exclamation on that. These officers deal with trauma every single day. When they walk out the house, they don't know what they're going to deal with. And then they have to turn around and help someone else who is in a traumatic state. So I just thought that was a great point.
Okay, so this next question is for you both. Mental illness is complex and looks different for everyone. But is there any simple advice or wisdom you could give someone right now who's listening and maybe struggling?
The biggest advice that I would give is stop talking yourself out of asking for help. Your problem, whatever you're dealing with, is not too small, insignificant for you to ask for support. A lot of times I have even friends that have asked, like, is what I'm dealing with significant enough? Is it a big enough problem for me to actually go and see a therapist? And I usually say, absolutely, it's big enough because it's happening in your life. And whatever is happening in your life is relevant because it's your life. So that would be my biggest wisdom or advice to give is stop talking yourself out of asking for help. Do not minimize or dismiss what you're going through. It does matter.
And I would say my favorite part in the airplane is when you're getting ready to take off and they're going through all the procedures and they are talking about the oxygen masks coming down, and they advise you that before you help someone else, please put on your mask first. And I would venture to say there are probably a lot of people that are going to watch this show that will benefit from hearing that you help everyone else but yourself. And you need to learn to put your mask on first. Your community, your family, will only benefit from you being your best self. And you can only be your best self if you're breathing first. If you die, there's no way that you're going to be able to handle or take care of the things that the weights and the pressures of life that you feel. You matter first. And so to piggyback off of Sade, self-care is so important. I think more than ever, self-care is important. Learn to take breaks, learn to say no. It is a full sentence. And learn to put that mask on first. So that would be something I would want people to walk away with.
That's so true. That's so true. So how do you deal with your own mental stressors, both in your relationship and individually?
I would say that my biggest and most helpful way of dealing with my mental stressors in life is individually being very mindful, being very present, and doing things that bring me a sense of calm and peace. So that's usually quiet time. I paint, I do art. So that is something that helps me to really kind of escape. And being outdoors definitely would be my number 3, is spending time outside, whether that's hiking, walking, just sitting in the sun and getting some vitamin D is like more than enough for me. And then within our relationship, I would say, being intentional with Kadeem about having time away. We have 4 kids, you guys. So, having time away as 2 adults, talking, catching up with one another on things maybe we've missed throughout the week because we're taking care of the kids. My husband really, really loves to travel and show me the world. And so like going on trips with him is a lot of fun, or sneaking away and getting massages together. But most of all, really within the relationship is being intentional about the quality time that we spend, I would say helps me with my mental stress.
That's great. Yeah, I would say the same thing. I love to take walks. I love being outside. I love the water. It's probably being a Caribbean. My family's from Barbados and my wife's family's from Jamaica. So I love the water, and I don't like the water here in Boston, if you're asking that question. I like the crystal blue water, hence why I like to travel.
That's warm.
Yes, and warm. But on a day where you had a stressful day, guess what? That beach water here in Boston, it works just fine taking my walk, because the smell of that ocean, it just helps. And, everybody needs to know. So their thing, and that's my thing. Water is my thing. Some people are mountain people. They like hiking, and I love to hike, but nothing calms me like the water. Spending time with my kids, that helps. You're going to say something, Tonya?
No, I was just going to agree with you on the water thing. That's why I love washing dishes, and people think I'm nuts, but just listening to the water and just, it's the little things.
It's so calming.
Until we can get to the island, right?
Yes. Yes, trying to afford living in New England, like the islands is a far distant cry, maybe once a year. But it's just, so I love the water, and then I love cooking. Spending time with my kids and my family on the couch, all of that kind of stuff just makes me feel centered. And then in our relationship, I like to spend a lot of time together outside of just being with the kids. So we work together, we do ministry together, we play together. Like, she's my best friend, I don't need another. And so that's always helpful, because it allows us to overcome things that we're going through personally, and then also together, so just leaning in. So we do a lot of traveling. We just came back from LA for Mother's Day. That was nice. And we'll go somewhere next. I'll just book it. That's normally what happens. So we do a lot to make sure that we're being intentional.
Today is actually Mental Health Action Day. And I want to know from the both of you, and I'll start with you, Kadeem, what is the most important action we all need to take in just understanding what mental illness is?
That's a great question. And yes, today is Mental Health Action Day. And I actually just had a conversation with the group yesterday about mental health. And one of the things I said was, inform yourself, right? Like, get information. There's so much information now on mental health, on being aware on mental health illness, on mental health issues and challenges. And if something is going on, seek help. There's, take that first step. Maybe the first step is to tell someone. Maybe the first step is not to go to a clinician, or not to look up for a therapist, or not to go to the psychologist, take yourself to the hospital. Maybe you've never told someone, hey, I'm struggling with anxiety. I'm struggling in my mind, and maybe you think there's no one safe. I promise you there's a safe person somewhere in your life that cares enough about you that will slow down and stop heaven and earth to listen. And then for other people that may not feel like they're struggling with anything, I challenge you to listen to someone and actually listen, not listen to find a response. Listen. Yeah. Practice those active listening skills and respond to them and say, hey, I hear you saying, is that what you mean? Because you don't know what kind of breakthrough that might provide for someone who's never felt heard. So those would be some actions that I would take.
And Sade, same question.
So we have a private practice called Compassion Counseling Associates. And our slogan is actually healing in action. And what that really means for me is that healing requires action. It requires you to be an active participant in actually getting to a place where you can say, I feel better, or I am better. And so not doing anything is not going to help you to become the person that you want to be, or to resolve mental health concerns that you are dealing with. So my biggest suggestion for someone listening would be, do something. Please do not just sit down waiting for something to happen for you, to you, come to you. Do something. Be active, get involved, fight for yourself, fight for your life, because it is valuable. And even the science behind it, if I can say this really quickly, when we're looking to actually feel better, chemically, I have to actually do something to release dopamine for my brain, right? To release dopamine or endorphins throughout my body. So if that aligns, right? Like, you got to do something to actually feel better. So please do something.
That is such great information, and we will definitely have your website available to our viewers. Kadeem and Sade, thank you so much for this important discussion. And as a programming note, the Messiahs have agreed to be back later this season to continue this important discussion on mental health. Until then, we thank you both for being here.
And coming up next month, musical sensation Michael Daughtry is our guest. He has a new album release, and we'll listen to some of it right here on the PowerPLAY show. Until next time, I'm Kimberly Perez.
And I'm Tonya McGrath. Thank you so much for tuning in.
You can listen to past episodes of The PowerPLAY Show wherever you subscribe to podcasts, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Pandora Podcasts. You can also watch The PowerPLAY Show on our YouTube channel. Simply search the Hull Bay Productions media channel and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also tune in Saturdays at 5 p.m. on BroncoIRadio.com. Want more of The PowerPLAY Show? Visit thepowerplayshow.com.